success from their respective fields, their early career. So they wanted to invite them here to provide a perspective on what they experienced in fellowship, especially early on as it applies to where you all are. And we titled our panel, Making the Most of Fellowship. So how did they get started in their careers? What were some tips and tactics that were used early on, and how did they find their path? So I will first introduce all four of them, and I'll have each of them kind of very briefly explain who they are, what they do, and then we just want to open it up to questions. So it's meant to focus on how you find your path as a fellow, how do you start that process, how do you find projects, mentorship, but the conversation can go wherever you want it to. So please ask questions and make this interactive. So I wanted to first introduce Dr. Jocelyn Grunwell on your left, and she comes to us from critical care. Next to her is Satoshi Kamadani, and he's from infectious diseases. And then Wade Alman from hematology oncology. And then next to him is Chris Reese from emergency medicine. So, nice. Thank you all for coming today. So maybe Jocelyn, we can start with you and just give a couple lines about who you are, what you do, and then we'll go from there.
So I'm a pediatric intensivist. I did my residency chief year here. I did fellowship here, was on a T32, which is a surgical critical care T32 sponsored by Craig Coopersmith across the street. I then went on to get the institutional K-12 award, and then receive funding for my individual K-23, which, you know, the K alphabet soup can be daunting to people. So a K-23, for people who don't know, is a human subjects research translational independent mentored grant. My main research focuses on the airway immune response in children with ARDS or who are at risk for ARDS. And I also have a translational project looking at children with critical and near fatal asthma and assessing their immune response. I do various health services research, I would say, looking at outcomes with some database work. And as part of the career development plan with the K-23, I am now in the second year of the MSCR program, which is a Master's of Science in Clinical Research. There's also a certificate program for those of you that don't want to devote the time to get the additional degree or don't have the time to devote to it. So I'm happy to talk about any of those opportunities. I think the most important thing, there's three things really to get the most out of your research time as a fellow. The first thing is to take stock of yourself and really figure out what you want to be when you grow up. So do you want to be in a lab? Do you want to be doing quality improvement projects? Do you want to be an educator? And I think you don't necessarily have to decide everything in your first 6 months here, but you really do need to have a sense of who you are and where you want to go, or else you're not going to be successful. The second thing is you have to do that and take stock of yourself so that you can figure out who you want your mentor to be. And finding mentorship is one of the key tasks that you have throughout your career, but especially as a new fellow, because your research mentor is critical to your development and exposing you to opportunities in your career development. So I would say that your mentor needs to be someone that you can closely get along with, share with, and has the appropriate resources and knowledge that can help you foster your new fledgling career. You may need to look outside your division for such support, and you may need to find more than one mentor for different aspects of your career and life. So
great, thanks.
Okay. Oh, and the last thing, there were three things. Research is not always, especially in a heavy clinical division, a Monday through Friday sport. So some of your free time may need to be devoted towards, you know, some kind of scholarly pursuit. Okay, now I'm done.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, my name is Satoshi. I'm a pediatric infectious disease physician. I graduated from this Emory PIDS-ID fellowship, so I know a couple of people here. Speaking of myself, so I was a pediatrician in Japan for a while, and then I moved to United States, and then did kind of repeated all training again. The residency in University of Colorado, and then moved to the Emory University, and then they completed the fellowship. So I'm kind of got too interested in vaccinology, especially vaccine safety studies and then vaccine epidemiology type research when I was in Japan. So during my fellowship, I did mainly like a CDC epidemiological kind of studies using their broad database. So, and then also I got into vaccine trials at Emory, so the vaccine evaluation, VTEU, so vaccine treatment evaluation unit, where we conducted Moderna vaccine trials and then also the Pfizer trials for kids with the Dr. Anderson. So it was really great kind of learning experience when I was fellow. And then I'm fortunate to continue my research after being a faculty. And then also I'm keeping my relationship with the CDC. So I'm a vaccine safety researcher at the CDC. So hopefully I can kind of talk about my experience about how to get these kind of connections with the CDC folks to broaden your visions and opportunities to find your niche. Yep.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Wade Allman. I'm with Hematology Oncology, or AFLAC, as some of you guys. I didn't realize that right away when I started here, that AFLAC is HEMONC, but took me a couple months to realize that. So as your first year fellows are figuring that out, that's one important thing to know. I did all of my training up the road at Duke. And when I went into fellowship, I had no experience in a basic science lab. I'd never picked up a pipette before. But I joined a basic science lab thinking that that was one of the things I should do as a fellow to sort of learn that kind of stuff. And sort of the rest is history. I thought I was going to do my 2 years and be done. But here I am 4 years after fellowship, and I still have, I'm 80% research. So 80% of my time is spent in the lab or on my computer doing stuff from the lab. And sort of figuring that out. I work with a certain type of leukemia called calm-AFN leukemia. We study how it works, and we're currently in some really exciting work is that we now have this inhibitor for our potential leukemia that we're hoping to continue to move forward into our mouse models, and then ultimately move forward. So I like to also say that I am just an MD, so which often gets laughs across because usually you think of people in basic science needing a PhD and doing something like in cancer bio PhD kind of thing. But I sort of have not followed that track specifically. I've sort of followed the HEMONC track, where I've been able to have a so far fairly successful career, I guess, for the first few years here. You know, it's hard to look back yet because I'm not even 40 yet, so we're going there. I only have a month left to say that, so I have to pepper that in when I can do that, but we're going to do that. So I'm happy to answer questions about basic science, lab, and if you guys have that stuff. Jocelyn gave some advice. My one piece of advice for fellowship is during your research years, and I think every fellowship is a little bit different, but ours, HEMONC, is a year of clinical and then 2 years of heavy, just sort of basic or heavy research years. And my mentality through that was just to sort of put your head down during those couple of years and not let sort of the other stuff sort of get in the way. And it's hard because, you know, as a fellow, you want to, you know, you spent the previous, you know, year of clinical, 3 years of residency, 4 years of medical school, 4 years of college, like having this schedule like lined out for you. And research is a different world. So to be able to put your head down and focus on your research, to make your own schedule, and to make those findings, which is so my one thing is just during your research time, just make it your research time. This is one of the only times of your career that you get to like play in one sense. You get to have fun in the lab. You don't have to worry about the grants right away. You don't have to worry about the papers right away. They will get on you about that come towards the end of your fellowship, but it's a time where you have a time to play in the lab or in whatever research you're doing. So.
Awesome. Is this working? You guys can hear me? Thanks for having me. Exciting to be here. And there goes the mic. I guess my, my sort of, I think it's working. Sorry. I think the way I would sort of frame what I'm going to say is that my hope is by the end of my spiel, you'll realize that research is not a four-letter word. And I say that because I think a lot of people start fellowship a little allergic to research and a little intimidated by research. And I think that's okay. I think, you finished residency and you were very busy clinically working, 80 hours a week. And now you have this sort of time that you're expected to start to ask questions and try to figure out the answers. And I would just encourage you to figure out if that's for you, right? You have, the way I think about research and fellowship is you have to do a project, right? Depending on your fellowship, you probably have to do one. Some fellowships make you do more than one. So there's sort of like the phase one, if you're just, I'm going to do this because I want to finish and be a clinician, and that's fine. It's not to say, don't go into it passionately, still try to find something you're passionate about, but just realize that that may not be the right thing for you. I started fellowship sort of thinking, oh, maybe I'll be a researcher. I had a few ideas of what I was interested in, but with time, I got really excited about it, and I loved asking questions. I loved the whole process of like just something that would come up on a shift that would bother me, right? It's like that's where I really get my ideas. What bothers me, and I work predominantly in global health from a research perspective, and there are a lot of things that bother me in global health. A lot of the places I work have childhood mortality rates that are, like 1 in 10 kids are going to die during their hospitalization, and that really bothered me. Particularly during a year I spent in Malawi as a resident. But I didn't have the wherewithal as a resident to realize that was sort of going to be my career path. I just knew that really bothered me and I wanted to do something about it. So I would just encourage you to kind of pay attention to those things that bother you and that you get excited about trying to figure out. So just kind of briefly about me with that sort of canvas, or upon that canvas rather. I'm pediatric emergency medicine, which has already been mentioned. So I work clinically in the emergency department. I'm soon to be 50% clinical, 50% research. I just came here from Boston Children's where I was a fellow and chief fellow. And part of my package was sort of 3 months of clinical work to kind of get my feet wet, get to know the place. And then I sort of parse back on clinical work and kind of more heavily get involved with research. My research interests, as I mentioned, are primarily in global health. And if I had to put it in one sentence, I would say I'm interested in trying to identify children who are high risk for mortality so we could develop interventions to prevent those, again, really high mortality rates that I'm describing in places like Sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. I'm also interested in health inequities and disparities in the United States, and I think that's directly related to global health. I just think of global health as being, the delta between the disparity is a lot larger than what we might see here. And then lastly, I'm interested in kind of research prioritization. And are we thinking about the questions that actually matter? Or are we sort of following what funders think is important? Or are we actually addressing what patients need and what what's going to sort of push the needle forward? So I'm happy to be here. I didn't really prepare anything. That's sort of off the cuff, and maybe it was halfway coherent. But I'm happy to be here and happy to chat about anything you guys may want.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Thanks, everybody. So we'll open it up. If you all have a question, please go ahead and ask.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one since it was semi-directed my direction. You're right. There's this, scholarly oversight committee that has these, timestamps, and by December you have to have your lit review done, and blah blah blah, right? Particularly in global health, that doesn't fit. Especially during my fellowship, COVID happened, and that sort of directly limited the amount of time I could spend in Liberia and Tanzania, which is primarily where I work. So what I did, I had the same thought as you. I chose a project for my, SOC sanctioned project. That really does not stay on my lap very well, does it? Failing that one. So I chose a project that was retrospective. I used publicly available data, and I got it done in 15 months, and the paper was published by halfway through fellowship. And so then and that was great, and that was done, and they could write the letter to the ABP saying this has been completed, done. The bigger project I wanted to do was a prospective observational study in 2 countries involving 4,000 patients, and that's what I was starting to write grants for, and so on and so forth. And I'll tell you, we just finished enrolling 2 weeks ago, and now I'm here. I've only been here for 3 months, but still it's spilled over past fellowship. So I took that same approach, realizing, yes, there's this hoop I have to jump through. It was something I was interested in. I wasn't doing it just to go through the motions, but the side hustle, if you will, even though it really has been my main hustle, is this big study that, we had to write a bunch of proposals for and get, 5 different IRBs to sign off on type of thing. So I would just say yes to your question. Do the thing that your fellowship director is going to hound you about, but find those other projects and do start working on them. And don't worry if it's going to spill past fellowship. Your affiliation can change if you leave when you publish your papers or the bigger stuff. That's totally fine.
And I'll say, to piggyback off of that, your project, again, I started in a basic science lab, never having pipetted before, and I still got a project out. And the project that's required by the ABP, it's actually a little bit more broad than just a manuscript about your research. So I submitted for my work product a grant that was funded, and so I didn't have a manuscript in fellowship, because in my 2 years of research, because it's basic science, and that's just not the way that rolls. But I submitted a funded grant, and that was okay by them. And it doesn't even need to be funded; it just needs to be well reviewed or highly whatever. Basically, that you can't come back saying this was a terrible grant. As long as it was good and the science was good and all of that, that's sort of the ABP allowed that to happen. So
I would recommend that you think about what you want to be and where you want to be in 3 years. If you want to be an academic, PICU intensivist, you're going to need to have publications, if that's what makes you competitive for the job market and for subsequent funding awards. In my experience, fellows or residents even who are not interested in the topic and don't have a good relationship with their mentor do not succeed at the check the box type of a project, and it is everyone's waste of time. So unless it is something that you can conjure some passion for, you really like the mentor, then your best option is actually to put your efforts into your global health pursuit, as long as you can find a mentor and you're willing to put in the extra effort to do what it takes to make it successful. People are only successful when they actually have a true passion and interest for things. And so I have seen people whose projects I never thought would have gotten off the ground succeed because they actually were in love with the project. And so they work to troubleshoot things. But barring that, there's nothing wrong with the check the box project. Just realize you might feel like you're going for a root canal every single day that you're on your research month, and that's not really what we're going for.
I think in my opinion, I think what you said is it's not a mutually exclusive. You can still find the smaller project, the pilot studies within your interest, right? I think that it's matter whether how much you want to seek and then look for the kind of smaller project. Because, even though you have a bigger project, there's still some, you probably could have some like a side project within that bigger project. So I think for me, I did a 2 CDC project. One is kind of bigger. Well, both are the multi-site studies, but the database is already available. So I chose kind of smaller project within the data network, which is still within my interest, but the topic is not that, fancy, or like probably I cannot get good like an impact factor kind of type journal, but still, it's enough to be able to get to know the site PIs, or like know other investigators to build your networking. So that was my kind of priority, like get to know the peoples in my field, because these kind of connections and networking will put you up to the next level, which did for me. So I was able to kind of establish my relationship with the CDC, and then my project was the Kawasaki disease and then the vaccine safety, meaning like after certain type of vaccines, there are a couple case reports that they developed the Kawasaki disease after the vaccination. So that's why, the question is whether or not the vaccines could cause the Kawasaki disease or not. It's the topic is not that fancy, but still, you can get the manuscript out. And then now, based upon my experience in the Kawasaki disease, they recognize me as a MISC kind of consultant. So I'm kind of serve as a vaccine safety researcher, especially for the MISC at the CDC. So we're doing the further project based upon these kind of experience and networking. So I think, you can, I prefer smaller project for the fellowship, but also my goal is a little different. It's kind of networking and these kind of building the relationship with the mentors and a mentors team. That's my priority.
Go ahead.
So within the Division of Critical Care, there is no mentorship that is viable if you want to become a K to an R independent funded researcher. Why do I say these harsh words? Because in order to make that pathway viable, there needs to be some predecessor that has done that. Or there needs to be someone who is an independent R01 investigator. Because in order to get a K, your mentorship structure matters. So you need to be strategic if that is your pathway for how to cultivate and create this environment for yourself. So as a resident, a fellow, I have never had a mentor within my division. I've had mentors in neonatology, adult pulmonary and critical care medicine, and in pediatric pulmonology. My current mentor is actually a nurse scientist who runs the Pediatrics Georgia CTSA and is the director of asthma research. So, you find who you click with, you find who's willing to support you and is open enough to foster your career development. And I think the mentorship is the critical part, and whether they can support you financially and with resources, meaning tech support, research coordinator support, knowledge of how do you write a K, how do you write a IRB protocol, how do you answer reviewer questions if it's the first manuscript you've ever published, okay? So there's a lot more that goes into mentorship than just the fact that they have the rubber stamp of 5 years of support for you as an R01 funded investigator. But that knowledge, institutional knowledge, divisional knowledge is critical. Because if you don't have it, you can't build the pipeline. So if you're stuck in that situation, you have to be creative, and a little extra motivated. So to this day, I still have very good, relationship with, Luann Brown, who is my initial mentor, David Guido, who's the adult critical care division chief, and Craig Cooper Smith, who has been instrumental in getting me positioned in the Society of Critical Care Medicine. And then the rest is just hustling on your own and trying to figure out who your research nerds are and who's your community in pediatric critical care. So that would be the pediatric acute lung injury and sepsis investigators. And you find mentorship at other places like Boston Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. You have to find your nerd club that you can be with, whether it's via Zoom, phone calls, meetings, etc. And it's not a failure to find mentorship outside your division. It is sometimes a vital necessity.
I'll say I think that is one of and continues to be one of the harder things, is to find someone outside your division, right? Because you're like, oh, I'm this fellow in this division, so I can't go elsewhere. And it's something honestly I've struggled with to figure that out. But when I've developed a mentor relationship with someone actually at the University of Colorado, and it's because of where sort of my work has taken me. And so, we found this one thing in our lab, and then I reached out to her because all of her studies are where we are, and we have no experience in this field, but she has all this experience. And it's a scary endeavor to write that first email to be like, hey, but no one I want to say no one's if someone's worth their salt, they're not going to just brush you aside. And she's been the person in Colorado has been absolutely wonderful and offering all the stuff that's taken my project from here to here, and hopefully in the next few years, if everything continues to work out, to actually go into clinical trials. And it's because of that mentorship. But it's always scary to take that first step, because you think they're not going to like me, they think I'm a whatever. And but if you're reaching out about a specific project to a certain someone, they're going to have it's a lot what they've spent their career working on. And so if they have someone young approach them to say, hey, I found this in here. And for instance, she works very heavily in breast cancer metastasis. I work in leukemia. They really shouldn't meet, but what I'm doing is showing. And she's like, holy cow, if this works, this is amazing for me. So she's going to mentor me through this whole project, but she gets a little something out of it too. And so I think it's a mutual relationship. I wouldn't ever approach someone to be like, dear Stacy, I work on this project. Can you be my mentor? It's more of a, dear Stacy, I've seen that you've done this research on this. I found this. I was wondering if we could at least set up a conversation about it. And that's where it starts. It's a simple email. And my simple email has turned into sort of a career shift for me, which has been kind of cool.
I can comment on that. So one thing that I was really happy to get involved in fellowship was I became a consultant for the WHO and also UNICEF. And the WHO thing just kind of materialized because I was talking to somebody who had sort of a loose connection with them, and there was I heard about this large data set, but nobody's used this data set that has 41 different data sets from 25 different countries. Why don't we try to do something with that? And so we set up a call, just kind of similar to what these guys are saying. You just send an email, not saying will you be my mentor, nothing like that. Just hey, I'd love to chat. And started looking into it. And again, my interests are kind of in mortality identification and prevention. But the first thing that they wanted to do was to try to figure out like what is pneumonia, which this is a longer discussion, and all the pulmonologists in the room can kind of nod their heads, but it depends on who you ask. And the WHO has basically said, a child who's breathing fast or has chest indrawing or what we call retraction, that's pneumonia. But all of us in the room know that's not necessarily what we think of as traditional pneumonia. So anyway, the first paper we published with them was looking at like, does what the WHO say is pneumonia match up with radiographic pneumonia? It turns out the answer was no. So that one was a little bit easier because it's like, well, the WHO has this policy that they're now kind of rethinking and rewriting their guidelines about what pneumonia is and how it's diagnosed in a child and so on and so forth. So that one made, that connection was already there. But I would say in the way of, taking your data and kind of advocating for it, that's hard because that's not something that we learn, right? One of my favorite people during fellowship often told me, like, you need to think about not what the title of your paper is going to be, but what the New York Times headline is going to be about your work, because that's where it actually starts to make a difference in terms of moving the needle outside of our sort of, silo of academic medicine. And I think that just comes by, having the right mentor who knows how to make those connections and so on and so forth. And also, if advocacy is what you want to do, like I would figure out ways to sort of learn how to be an advocate and learn how to go to state houses and learn how to go to DC and advocate and use the data that are out there, because they're not looking at what's being published in JAMA and New England Journal. Like sometimes they'll get headlines and that's where they hear about these things, but otherwise, like we kind of live in a silo, sadly, unless we do something about that.
For the prior questions, actually, I just want to share my experience about finding the mentorship. So my first career mentor was assigned by my program director, so not by myself. I think the idea is to help establishing the the relationship between the new fellows and then the faculty within the divisions, but it wasn't a great fit, to be honest. So because that's not chosen by yourself, right? So and then I was very struggling with how to say no, and then because the interest is a little different, and then not enthusiastic about teaching. So I think, but you gotta say, I need someone else, right? It's okay to have, once you find the mentors and then you feel like, oh, maybe this is not a great fit, it's okay to find another, mentor. There are a lot of other, potential mentors around you. So, and then again, finding the right mentor is the critical. So I sought out and other, potential mentors during my first year fellowship. So, and then it was great. And then I'm glad that, and then it's not personal stuff. So it's for you. So you gotta find what you like, persons who you like. That's only you know, right? And then trust your gut feeling. That's really important. It's a human to human kind of relationship, right? Even though that the mentor is like a top-notch kind of researcher, if he or she is not enthusiastic about teaching and then put you up to the next level, it's not going to be the great fit. So, and then I think keep looking your right mentor is the critical.
So I don't know all the details about the certificate program. I'm intimately aware of the MSCR requirements. There's slightly more coursework and there is a thesis at the end of it. I don't think that the thesis part exists for the certificate. There are HEMONC fellows and ID fellows in pediatrics who actually have been in the certificate program, and PhD students. We can talk offline to get involved. I don't know what division you're in. If you're in one of those, you may already know them. Basically, it is a comprehensive introduction to clinical research. So it's heavy on biostatistics and the fundamentals of statistics. It moves into some high dimensional data analysis. What do I mean by that? Like when you don't have a large enough sample size, but you have a gajillion trillion variables and you need to do some kind of dimensional reduction to understand your data. Think of like clustering analyses you've probably seen in the literature with like microarrays or RNA-seq data, things like that, although it can apply to social science stuff as well, okay? It goes into fundamentals of R and statistical management with statistical software. So you'll get labs in SAS or R or both, depending on which way you want to go. You get fundamentally taught like basics of methodology and design. It's heavy emphasis on epidemiology, which is important for many of the projects you would do outside of a basic science lab. It has practical things like grant writing and scientific writing course that kind of thematically goes throughout the semesters. There's a community-based health track that everyone gets exposed to. So you were talking about like the public policy type interrelationships and community advocacy. That is sort of like a short course that is something that might be of interest to you. And then there's a whole health services research, like how does machine learning and big data kind of influence what we're doing in research. What other classes have I taken there? It's a lot of work. It's like a lot of work. I do it part-time, it feels like full-time. So instead of doing this in a year, like a lot of there's the med students, there's adult people, you still have your day job and your own research, my own research lab to run. So, doing it over 2 to 2.5 years has actually been good. You have to apply. The applications are usually due in March, April. It's essentially like a mini K. You have to have a research proposal, spec aims page, your biosketch, career development plan. Like again, assessing where you want to be and where you are and where you want to go. Like why is all this work necessary to foster your career? Maddie Wolf is a neonatology fellow who's doing it now. If you're in cardiology, one of the faculty, Irene Buto, is in it. For neurology, Grace Gambolet is in it. They're faculty though. I've seen fewer PEDS fellows this year than last year when I was in it. And then there's also an ethics component, which is an NIH requirement at any stage of funding. Yeah, my K pays for this, right? So, and I'm also a faculty member, so courtesy scholarship pays for it, part of it. So that comes down to who your mentor is and what your division's willing to do for you. What investment are they willing to make?
Go ahead.
So first off, you have to have a mentor who knows how to do this. And you need to take you need to demonstrate that the Department of Pediatrics is willing to support you, whether that's through startup funds, you applying competitively for internal pilot grants. You should also look into, I don't know what type of research you're interested in, but instead of a K-12, which is in Department of Peds, there's KL2. There's a Birch Scholarship if you're interested in women in health and women's healthcare. There's a absolutely fabulous grantsmanship writer named Janet Gross who looks at your application. The way I navigated it is you get other people's successful applications and you emulate what they've done. And you start early and you make your spec aims page, get your biosketch in shape, get all of the pieces together and talk to a knowledgeable mentor who's willing to actually help you draft out all of the billions of letters and support things that you need to get a successful K going. If you want, you can talk to me offline if that's what you're interested in. There's a lot that goes into grantsmanship and gamesmanship when it comes to making yourself successful. I would say one of the keys to my success, especially institutionally, especially not being in a research-focused clinical division, had to do with the sheer number of papers I had and the breadth of the different publication types that I had had. And then just having mentors that are willing to go to the mat for you and say, yeah, you need to take a chance on this person. And you just have to check all your boxes. So an NIHK award is 75% protected time for research, 25% clinical. So what does that mean in a clinical, like a critical care division? Typical full FT and pediatric critical care will do about, I would say 16 to 20, like Monday through Friday weeks, and an additional 8 to 12 between weekends and night and holiday call, okay? So for me, that means I do 4 weeks of service, complete Monday through Friday, and I take the same number of night, weekend, holiday call as my partners who are full FTEs. So it works out to be about 8 total weeks of service, I would say, which is pretty good. Now, people who have to navigate clinic, that's a whole ball of wax, because we all know, and I don't do clinic. So clinic kind of consumes your life, and it's not really the half day people say it is. There's a lot of extra work, patient follow-up. You really ought to talk, if that's the kind of division you're in, to people like Michelle Shetler, who's in BMT. She's in the MSCR program. How does Grace Gambolet navigate that? Because they don't have protected time, or they don't have like the protected time that I have. When you write a K, you actually have to physically write in multiple places that the institution guarantees that I will have 75% of my time protected, or the NIH just won't even entertain your application. But they're good here about knowing all the I's that have to be dotted and the T's that have to be crossed to be successful. They've had a lot of successful K applicants between, peds and adult, Emory.
From my perspective on that clinic versus inpatient stuff, I do, as HEMONC, I do 4 weeks of inpatient service, give or take, usually maybe 3 inpatient service a year. And then there's another person who's also 80-20 like me. And so we actually flip-flop Fridays so that I work every other Friday in clinic. So it works out to be a half a day a week, but anyone in oncology clinic knows, like, a half a day of clinic, if you start in the morning, you're leaving at 3 o'clock, so it's not a half a day. So we flip-flop our Fridays to make that work. So that's how the 80-20 or 75-25 split works, with, at least in our area, with clinic. So.
If you don't have the funding, you have to buy your time. So you have to pay your own salary.
For me, my project is, again, through the CDC. So I have other sites to produce the data and then the chart review. So it's sometimes it's out of my control, right? It has to be their pace too. So you gotta be very patient. And then sometimes it took time to get the response from each site. So, but I think how I, solve these kind of time when I'm waiting is again, I have a side project so that I can kind of work on. So, and then, I think other, research like lab or other type of the research also have some, downtime, right? So you try to be efficient as possible and then productive as possible, but by having the other project or doing again like building a network, and then like use your time to invest other stuff. So that's how I solve these issues. So.
I would just say, go into it expecting things not to work out. Like that's just kind of the norm. And I think that's kind of what's fun about it is that you then get to troubleshoot. If you find that the frustration outweighs the curiosity that you have, then you're not in the right field and you're not doing the right thing. Because I promise you, your papers are going to get rejected. I promise you, you're not going to get grants you apply for. But you keep applying and you revise and resubmit, and that's part of the process. Like, I don't know if you guys know who John Ioannidis is, but he's this amazing researcher at Stanford, and he's the guy who published his work like why most of what's on PubMed is incorrect. Like he very much writes about research and like why we're doing things, why we're kind of missing the mark. He's this amazing thinker. But anyway, his CV is publicly available, and you can download it and read it. And he has this narrative paragraph in the last paragraph, or in the last section rather, and it says something like, I'm the most cited author in PubMed, and my H index is blah blah blah. And it seems very conceited, right? But then the next sentence is, but what's not reflected in my 200-page CV or whatever is that for each paper I've published, I've submitted and been rejected to 3 or 4 or 5 journals, right? I've not received far more grants than I have received. So it's just part of the process of things not working. And you learn from that, right? If you allow yourself to learn from it, if you just sort of sit there and swear at reviewer number 2 and say, why the hell don't you think that this is the right test and blah, 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 whatever, like that's not going to help you. But if you sort of just take it and see what you can learn from it and move forward, then I think your mental health is better. And also you have this sort of better understanding of kind of the big picture, right? Like one of my mentors in residency told me, if you get accepted to the first journal you submit to, you didn't aim high enough. And I'm sort of taking that to heart, and I'm surprised when they get accepted to the first journal I submit to, because again, I plan on it not working out, and that's fine. It doesn't bother me. I just know that it's part of the process, and I believe in what I'm doing, and I know that it's going to get across the finish line, whatever it is.
To piggyback off that, and Stacey, I sent you this in an email. There's a video that I saw yesterday on Twitter. It's someone that I've forgotten her name, but from 2009, she tells the story of how she was the recipient of the Nobel Prize for topoisomerase something. And so she tells the story that it was the day of her review for her next R award. And she knew at like 8 o'clock they were reviewing her R award. 5 a.m. that morning, she gets a phone call from the Nobel Committee saying, congratulations, you won the Nobel Prize on topoisomerase. 8 o'clock, the committee meets for her R, like one of her R renewals. And the committee got together and said that her proposal was triaged because the preliminary data was not good enough. But she had just gotten, like 3 hours before, had gotten the Nobel Prize for that same exact work. And so like, so I sent it to Stacey because she does a bunch of these talks about grantsmanship. But like, you're gonna like Chris said, you're gonna fail at some things, but like you learn from those failures to move to the next step.
I would say, Ela, that we are probably our own worst critics. So in times when you feel that things aren't going your way or they're not going as smoothly, I think that's where your mentor comes in. I also think that's when you need to take more of a growth mindset. So it's a failed experiment. It's a failure. It's not, right? You learn something about that experience of failure, and what you learn and what you decide to do with it is more important. So there's 2 really good books if you're a little self-help junkie, which, Dr. Kamat and I like to share our little self-help books. So the first is, I think her first name's Angela Duckworth. It's called Grit. She's a psychologist at Penn. And then the second one is a Stanford professor in psychology, Carol Dweck's book, Mindset. And both kind of change your paradigm. So I think going through my PhD, my postdoc, you can get pretty negative and kind of down on yourself and feel like, your experiments or your failures are kind of defining you. And I remember many years later, my husband, who's also a PhD scientist, he sent me this article that was in like Cell or Science or something, some kind of like editorial thing. And it was a male scientist who had run into a female scientist who he had been in graduate school with, and she had quit science, left science. And he's like, this person, she was like brilliant. She was top of the class. She knew how to do all the classes. She looked like she had her poo together, And when he ran into her, he was like, why don't you do this anymore? You're like the smartest person one of the smartest people I met. And she said, I couldn't handle the failure. I took it personally. Every time something didn't work, it was like, I sucked and I couldn't like recover from it. And she couldn't live and exist in that world. And he thought about it and he's like, well, there's a lot of things that didn't work for me. There's a lot of times when I went and talked to the Nobel laureate down the hall and they just kind of shrugged their shoulders and didn't really help me either. And he said, what's the difference in the paradigm between her mentality and my mentality? And why am I still here? And she's like a patent lawyer or something. She was successful, just she wasn't, the PhD scientist. And it was the fact that every time he failed, he didn't look at it as a failure. He said, well, what did I learn that I need to change for the next iteration of this experiment? Do I need to alter the salt concentration? Did I screw up the temperature? Do I need to add this extra who's-ma-who? Like, do I need to learn a new technique? Like, what is it about what screwed up? And how am I going to change it next time? And when you flip the script, you change how you feel about yourself and you change about your science and you become successful. And I think, not view failure as the end all be all. Make sense? I still have to learn that lesson on a weekly basis, by the way. So.
And to bring the conversation, we're going to finish up, to bring the conversation full circle, like having a mentor that you can go to say, hey, like, and I've gone to my primary mentor and said, I've had a real crappy few weeks here in the lab. And I don't get it. I don't understand what I'm doing or not even that, just to say, I've had a real crappy few weeks and I'm sorry. And like, he understands because it's science and like we are all learning from it, but to find a mentor who can appreciate that and not ride you to say, well, why did that fail? And why did that not work? You need to do this. You need to do this. Have a mentor that like says, we get it. Let's think about it and let's move forward. So to answer the mentoring question, to answer that, to have that support, because there are going to be days where, in my case, experiments fail or cells die or you don't get patient accrual. But your mentor has been there to support you. Your mentor's been there before to do that, and they'll know of ways to, even if it's just to listen. And that's one of the real important things about a mentor as well.
They're also good at telling you when to cut bait and
that too.
They just say, don't do it. Let's move on.
Yeah.
And that comes from experience.
All right. Well, that's the end of our session. Thank you all for joining us today, panelists. That was very great, fruitful discussion for the fellows. I think we'll take a lot out of this. So thank you for coming.